Well, hello there, and welcome to another Infinite Inning Reissue episode, the 27th in the series. It means I've done these for about half a year now, but this is our first in about 3 weeks after the short holiday weeks that we had at the end of 2025. It sort of surprises me. I realize we're about a week in now, but it surprises me that I referred to 2025 in the past tense so easily. It came so naturally. Time flies when you're older. And I can remember being a little kid in elementary school, and we were taught that for today's assignment, for every assignment, you write your name on the top left hand of the page, you write the date on the top right hand of the page. We had to write it out longhand, so no 1/7/1979, God, but rather a January 3rd, 1979. And for the first several days back at school, I would struggle not to write the previous year in automatically, because when you're a little kid, 1 year lasts like 3 years, and it just becomes ingrained that this is the year that you write. You're not prepared for the calendar to change. Well, it has changed, and in this case, it's probably a good thing. I have not changed. I hope I've evolved since you've last heard from me. I hope that we are forever evolving, all of us, in a positive direction. But one thing does remain constant. I am, as I have been for nearly 9 years now, your congenial host, Stephen Goldman, for the Infinite Inning Podcast, a journey to better understanding the present via the past, the time machine very often being, almost always being, the game of baseball, a microcosm of American society. And this episode, which takes us back to show number 17 from the program's very first year, certainly qualifies on that count. It's still sadly current, speaking about situations that haven't evolved. When I recorded the episode, I was reacting to the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, the one that resulted in the death of a protester against bigotry, against racism, against the people who, as you will hear me say, were chanting, "You shall not replace us," or "We won't be replaced," or whatever nonsense that crowds their brains. And that train of thought led me to Jackie Robinson and Casey Stengel and a lot of the places that my mind usually goes when we talk about Americans and how they relate to each other, particularly on the issues of citizenship and race and things of that nature. But the real reason that I pulled this one out today is because I then segued into baseball and days that war was declared and what the situation was in the game and in the nation when those events took place. And that subject and the introduction that I'm about to give you now, which is on the same theme, more or less, or a similar theme, seem particularly topical and timely given the games that the administration is playing, the deadly game that it's playing with Venezuela, and the kind of genies that you tend to let out of the bottle when you do these things haphazardly, recklessly, and immorally. And I guess it still is relevant, even though this morning I awoke to the news that ICE agents had murdered a woman in cold blood in Minnesota. And there's video. I don't advise you watch it, but they just shoot this woman in the face, step up to her car, and blow her away. And here's the thing. I was about to say that made these stories of wartime less relevant, but I realize it makes it more relevant. Because in this case, it's not happening in Venezuela. It's happening here. The war is at home. Before I proceed to that tale that I was about to tell you, another example of a war deflecting someone from the life they might otherwise have had, I just need to say that this reissue, the edit, was kind of a mess. As you know, part of the reason I was inspired to do these reissues was to avoid some copyright issues that came up later. I'm not going to explain all of that again. But in this instance, I had utilized September Song by Maxwell Anderson and Kurt Weill from back in the 30s as an example of a song that picked up on the zeitgeist, even though the authors might not have known they were doing that. They were writing a song that, as I explained in context, was a song of seduction and maybe manipulation, but it was really talking about the end of the interwar world. Certainly retroactively, you can view it that way, and it's entirely fair game to do so. However, when it came to separating my voice from the betting, from me speaking over parts of that song, it became kind of difficult to do for reasons that would probably be very tedious if I took the time to explain them. So I just re-recorded what I had said, sans music. So you will notice some audio differences as I jump in to read the words, and as I alert you to when that comes up, I can't just play the song for you, so I read some of the verses. I urge you to seek the song out for yourselves, both the Walter Houston original and any of the covers, Frank Sinatra's from the album September of My Years, Lou Reed's, Ian McCulloch's of Echo and the Bunnymen, Jimmy Durante, Willie Nelson. Willie's is on his great album of classic pop, Stardust. There are so many. So before we move on to the reissue portion of the episode, let me just say this. In 1953, the Yankees had an infield prospect out of Wichita State University in Kansas named Dick Sanders. He first played in the Yankee system that year for the Class B Norfolk Tides of the Piedmont League. He was 21 years old, and he played very well, hitting .276 with a .390 on base percentage and a .425 slugging percentage, 17 doubles, 5 triples, 12 home runs in 113 games. He took 75 walks. None of that is bad at all for a shortstop. Now, Sanders was a popular kid in Wichita. He played quarterback and defensive back for his college, was also on the basketball team, and chucked the javelin for the track and field team. The Norfolk fans really liked him too, and were quite annoyed when the Yankees front office made a couple of moves that affected him. The Yankees instructed Norfolk's manager, the old Dodgers catcher, Mickey Owen, to give him a trial at third because they questioned his range, but they liked his arm. He was replaced at short by the teenage infielder Bobby Richardson. That marked the beginning of Richardson's professional career. The Norfolk fans didn't appreciate Richardson taking over for Sanders, so they booed the poor kid relentlessly. Richardson was so unnerved by that the Yankees had to send him down to Class D Olean of the Pony League, and he did a lot better there, hitting .412. I feel for that kid version of Richardson, although it happened 73 years ago. What happened to Sanders next wasn't Bobby Richardson's fault. It wasn't the Yankees' fault. You could blame Kim Il-sung or colonialism or the Cold War, the federal government, the United Nations, Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower, Douglas MacArthur and Matthew Ridgway. You might blame Uncle Joe Stalin, but Stalin told the North Koreans not to attack. Blame the architects of the post-war world for leaving the Korean peninsula in a mess. Blame the Japanese for occupying the place from 1910 onwards. Just don't blame Bobby Richardson or Dick Sanders. Despite the questions about Sanders' defense, the Yankees planned to move him up to Binghamton of the Eastern League in 1954. There was just one problem with that, and I've already suggested what it was. The Korean War was on, there was a draft, and Sanders' time had come. In October 1953, he reported for basic training. He wouldn't return for 2 years. I don't know what his war service was like. I know he did play some baseball. The armistice of the Korean War, there's still been no peace treaty, was signed in July 1953. So if he got to Korea, it was part of some residual force and not in combat, to which I say good for him. He was not a casualty in any of the senses we typically mean that when we talk about a war, but his baseball career was, because there is a huge difference between being a 21-year-old prospect and a 24-year-old prospect who hasn't yet played at the highest levels. A 2-year layoff is generally hard on one's baseball skills. It's devastating. When Sanders returned in 1956, he did play quite well at Binghamton. The Yankees sent him there as if there hadn't been a 2-year gap. And in fact, he was the best offensive player on the team, hitting .305, .401, .537 with 27 doubles, 14 triples, and 20 home runs in 139 games. He exclusively played third. He fielded .935. I know that doesn't sound great, but third basemen play in so close, they typically get charged with a lot of errors, and a kid fielding .935 doesn't mean he can't play third in the majors. You see a lot of 800s in the minors. Those are the guys who can't play third in the majors. And so, the next year, Sanders finally got to AAA Denver, playing under future Yankees manager Ralph Houck. And that is where, to a large extent, the story really stops progressing and this prospect stopped being a prospect. Hitting in Denver then was still hitting in Denver as it is now. It is at a high elevation the ball travels. Sanders' team as a whole, the Denver Bears, hit .291 with a .374 on base and a .466 slugging percentage. Those are huge numbers for a team. Sanders averaged .268, .358, .496. It's not terrible, but it's actually kind of below average in context. He hit the fourth most homers on the club, 17, despite appearing in only 96 games. Partway through the season, the Yankees moved him to AAA Richmond. I'm not sure why that happened. And with the return to sea level, he stopped hitting permanently. He had been so close. The Yankees liked to hold early camp for prospects at that time so they could get direct coaching from manager Casey Stengel and the rest of the major league staff. Once Mickey Mantle and Whitey Ford showed up, they were going to have bigger fish to fry. Sanders was among the invitees for 1957. Tony Kubek was in the group that spring, having played at Denver in 1956, and his showing convinced Casey that he was ready for the majors. He made the team as a super sub, won the Rookie of the Year award, and then went on to a 9-year career. It was cut short due to injuries, but he had still made it, and he was a very good player for a while. Sanders had 3 years in the minors to go, but all of it would be at AAA, and it came to diminishing returns. He played 2 more years for the Yankees, 1 year in the Dodger system after the Yankees gave up on him, and his final AAA averages were .249, .337, .396 in 562 games. Those are not prospect numbers, particularly if you're not a defensive third baseman like Brooks Robinson. After his professional career ended, Sanders, by then 28, returned to Wichita and opened up an insurance agency. He played a little semi-pro ball on the side as well and was very successful with that. He played in 8 National Baseball Congress tournaments. That event is held in Wichita, so that must have been convenient. He was on the winning team on one occasion. He was also named the tournament MVP in 1964. He passed away, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren in 2021. I am in no way saying that his was not a life well lived, because it clearly was. Rather, I am making a point about external factors that can deflect us from what seemed like our destiny, or at the very least, something that was our dream. It is one thing to try and fail, and another to be yanked up like a puppet on a string and pulled out of your pursuits in life. When Sanders passed, his hometown paper, the Wichita Eagle, called him one of the city's best all-around athletes of all time. I quote, "He has been inducted in the Kansas Sports Hall of Fame, Wichita Sports Hall of Fame, Shockers Sports Hall of Fame," that was the college team, the Kansas Baseball Hall of Fame, the National Baseball Congress Hall of Fame, and the Wichita North Hall of Fame. Sanders was selected as the number 34 athlete in Wichita sports history in a 2003 article in the Eagle. Again, I am not taking anything away from Dick Sanders. He was a heck of a baseball player. The point is one I've made countless times before on the infinite inning. It is a trite and banal point, but one we forget all too easily. We have long understood that our masters lie and people die, that they play their games and terrible consequences follow. But even if we exclude those who suffer mortal consequences, I'm talking in this case about the Americans who fought in Korea, those who never came home. But even if we exclude them and we just talk about the Americans who did come home, who lived, and the families that missed them in either circumstance, whether they came back whole or in some way injured, whether the war was a good idea or a bad idea, or was well executed or botched, it was botched. It's immaterial. It took those boys out of their lives. It took the people who loved them out of their lives, and time is not fungible. The song I just talked about in this segment, and we'll talk about again in the reissue portion of the show, says, "I used to have time to wait for things, but it's September now, and I don't. And prospects don't have time to wait." And of course, you never can know what you might have done, what you might have hit. What if your children had been born earlier? What kind of degree might you have achieved in school? And on and on and on. These are counterfactuals, but they're counterfactuals that came into existence, not through any decision that Dick Sanders or anyone else made at that time, but because great men, both here and abroad, played great man games. And, well, that's what we elect them to do, or in the case of Korea, they elect themselves to do, or appoint themselves to do. We have no control over that, obviously, but our leaders have a responsibility to weigh their reactions carefully because they're playing with human lives on both sides. And even if you are capable, if you lack the humanity such that you are capable of saying, I don't care about the other guy, the overseas guy, the guy who looks different, who speaks a different language, kill them all, bomb them back to the Stone Age, take all their toys, they're our toys now. Well, you're going to get Americans killed too in that pursuit. And a far less serious but real potential consequence is that a Dick Sanders and many more like him don't get to fulfill their dreams. So even if you are fortunate enough to come home, something precious remains behind. What Sanders lost was 2 years of his life, and we can't know this for sure, but it seems like the time to master AAA pitching at 22, not 25, and play third base in the major leagues. The Yankees had an opening there too. They always had an opening there, right up until Greg Nettles came to town 18 years later. And while Sanders was drafted, that is, he went not against his will perhaps, but it's not something he volunteered for either, the same can be true of our current all-volunteer military force. They may or may not have signed up thinking that they were actually going to be in the line of fire at some point during their service. They had to know that it was a possibility. But if you get hurt somewhere like Venezuela, you'd hope that it would be for a good reason. Doesn't even have to have happened in combat. There was a famous interwar wounded veteran of the First World War who became for a moment a political figure. He was known for wearing a big steel column around his head because he was walking around with a broken neck. Was he shot by a German? No, not at all. He was serving in the Navy. He rolled out of his hammock. He broke his neck. Rightly or wrongly, who put him there? Franz Josef, Kaiser Wilhelm, Woodrow Wilson. Think of all those boys on both sides in the Civil War who coughed themselves or pooped themselves to death. I could be remembering this wrong, but I'm pretty sure there were more of those than there were combat deaths. So, another trite, banal thought, this one not mine, you've all heard it. With great power comes great responsibility, because Dick Sanders, at the most minimal. All right, that's all from me for this reissue episode. I think we'll just have the one break now, and that will be it for the remainder of the episode, as the reissue segment just runs another 20 minutes or so. So I'll be back at the end to say farewell, and as I indicated earlier, in the middle to just, well, recreate my own dialogue from almost 9 years ago. As always, thank you for being here. Now, please strap on your seatbelt as we activate our time machine for a visit to 2017 and points further back along the timeline. I don't know if this is exactly an infinite inning thing or not, but it's current events and it seems relevant. It's a very strange thing to me to walk around chanting, "We will not be replaced," because who's trying to replace you exactly? What overt plan is there for that? I sometimes worry about being replaced on an economic level because I have been replaced. When you get to a certain age and you get to have certain kinds of salary expectations, people can replace you because there's always somebody willing to do the job cheaper, and there's a bias in favor of people who are younger, and it's happened to me, and it's been happening throughout time. Nowadays, you can get sent off to pasture at 40, and you don't even get a gold watch. But in terms of being replaced as a breed, as a people, man, if anybody should think about that, it's people of my background, because from 1932 to 1945, someone actually tried it, it nearly worked, and it wasn't the first time. But I don't think about that in that sense very often because I'm an American and I live in the United States of America, and that is not the kind of place where we think of doing that to people. Yes, in the past, particularly when it came to Native Americans, we kind of tried it. We didn't try it in the organized way. It happened from 1932 to 1945. It was more protracted than that, but the effects were in their own way as bad. And for anyone who wants to dispute me on that, I direct you to look up the Sand Creek Massacre or Wounded Knee and understand that those were the big versions of something that there had been little versions of for years and years and years. That was the past, though. We seem to be doing less of that now. We've learned something, and even if we hadn't, it's the very people wandering about chanting we will not be replaced who were doing the replacing then. As always, baseball offers us some instruction in this regard. The idea of being replaced was something that marginal white players had to confront when baseball finally began to integrate in 1947. Now, some of the guys at the time were just general-purpose racists, and they objected to sharing facilities, sharing a team flight or a team bus with people of a different race, and they discriminated not because they felt threatened professionally, but because they had, as the Rodgers and Hammerstein song goes, been carefully taught to hate for hate's sake. When the Dodgers signed Jackie Robinson, Dixie Walker of Birmingham, Alabama, a star on the team, said, "I don't mind at all as long as he's playing for Montreal and not playing here." And he wasn't the only player, both with the Dodgers and in other organizations, who said the same thing. Fine with me as long as it's not on my team. It's weird that somebody would go on record that way, but they did. But it wasn't Dixie Walker, a career .306 hitter, who was going to be threatened by that, who was going to be quote-unquote replaced. It was the guys who couldn't play, whose continuance in the major leagues depended on the fact that there was an artificial barrier that prevented the game from being a true meritocracy. In our game, a game that really symbolizes everything that America has always been about, the idea that all men are created equal. You play if you can play. You earn your playing time based on achievement. If you hit better than the other guy, if you run faster or throw harder, you get to be in the lineup. And this may be an imperfect analogy because, genetically speaking, some people have quick twitch reflexes and some people don't, and some people have great eyesight and some people don't, but everybody can do something. Everybody has some ability if they're willing to dig it out and find it. As always, I like how Casey Stengel put it. At one time in the 1950s, he was celebrating his team, and if you're not a Yankees fan, the homerism in this statement isn't going to be easy to hear, but try to put it aside and listen to what he was really saying. He said, it's that carry-on spirit that the Yankees have, and everybody in this country wants somebody to be a Yankee or live like a Yankee, which don't mean just baseball, but to be somebody for the United States. And he was right. Stop bitching. Be somebody for the United States. The rest will take care of itself. Another person who I like in this regard, and who was intimately involved in the Jackie Robinson situation, was Pee Wee Reissue. Pee Wee Reissue was a shortstop, so initially was Jackie Robinson, so he was directly threatened. His livelihood, his place on the Brooklyn Dodgers, was directly threatened by Branch Rickey signing Jackie Robinson. When Robinson was signed, the wind down on World War II was in process, and Reissue was still in the Navy. He was on a ship somewhere in the Pacific, near Guam of all places, when it came over the wires that the Dodgers had signed an African-American shortstop. And Reissue had to think about that on a couple of levels, not just because he was the shortstop, but because he was from Louisville, Kentucky. He said, the first thing I thought about when I heard about Jackie being signed was, why does it have to be a shortstop? Why does he have to be playing my position? Why does he have to be after my job? And then he got even more anxious because there was a higher level to it. He said this in Boys of Summer by Roger Kahn. He was thinking, suppose he beats me out. I go back to Louisville, the people say, Reissue, you weren't man enough to protect your job from a... And then he said an unfortunate word that I don't feel like repeating, but you can imagine what it was. He went on, I mean, if they said to me, Reissue, you got to go over and play in the colored guys league, how would I feel? Scared? The only white? Lonely. But I'm a good shortstop. And that's why I'd want him to see. Not my color, just that I can play the game. And that's how I got to look at Robinson. If he's man enough to take my job, I'm not going to like it, but damn it, black or white, he deserves it. So you see, Pee Wee Reissue came around to the right state of mind, the only rational state of mind, which is that no one is going to replace you except the better man, so it's time to get to work. And on a broader level, saying otherwise is paranoia, it's excuse-making, it's special pleading. Once you find what you can do, once you are, as Casey put it, somebody for the United States, whether you're a ball player or a bricklayer, if you're good at it, you're essential. If you contribute, you're needed. all the complaining in the world, all the advocacy in favor of unearned privilege is not going to change that. You want to say that you're better than Ichiro Suzuki? Go make 4,000 hits. You want to say you're better than Joe DiMaggio? Go hit in 57 straight games. You want to say you're better than Hank Aaron? Go hit 800 home runs. And if you want to say you're better than the guy who's outperforming you in school or making more money than you or has bought your local business, well, get to work. Art Russ Jr., the sports radio talk show host and author, interviewed Emmett Ashford, the first African-American major league umpire. And Ashford told a story about the heckling he got at one of his first jobs. A man in the stands called him that same racial epithet I didn't want to say before and said, "I don't want you out there trying to do a white man's job." Ashford remembered, "I looked up at him and said, if you go home and put on some shoes, maybe then we can discuss the matter." That about sums it up for me. I'm Stephen Goldman, and this is the Infinite Inning Baseball Podcast. Told you they were shipping munitions on the Lusitania. To be fair, they didn't tell anybody. But what was really unfair was that they didn't tell you that your stateroom was right above the hold where they put all this stuff. So when the German torpedo hit and the whole thing blows sky high and you're shot 1,000 feet into the air, you have a wonderful view over it all. The flames, the smoke, the terror, the humanity of it all. And you think, if only I had taken that warning the Germans put in the paper seriously, I would have taken my voyage on episode 17. As you'll see, episode 17 not only goes to England and France, but to luxurious upstate New York. Lucky you. You'll hear us discuss issues arising from America's entry into the war 100 years ago this year that are still relevant and complicated today, including what do citizens owe the government in times of national emergency. Some ball players wanted to go fight and eagerly signed up. Others avoided it in some ways. And of course, some paid a very high price for going. Before we get to that, I wanted to tell you about some thoughts that Dr. Rick Mooring inadvertently put in my head. If you've listened to the show, you know Rick, or at least you know his name because I mention him at the conclusion of every episode. He co-wrote the theme song with me, and he's also my oldest friend. That's why I have something to say about him each and every time. We have literally 40 years of anecdotes to play with in his case, and I just know he's dreading the day I come up with one that's going to be embarrassing to him. I feel like everything that's ever happened when we were together was embarrassing to me, but anyway, we were talking about something fairly inconsequential. There was a video online the other day, and normally I don't share these, but this was kind of special to watch. A woman drove her car off the 7th floor of a parking deck, and I observed to Rick that I'd always wondered just how effective those retaining wires that are in parking garages actually are. I figured they weren't really there to withstand a runaway car. They were just there to give you a false sense of security. And Rick clarified my point for me. He said, and I quote, "Anything not overly threatening in this world is there to give you a false sense of security." And it occurred to me that baseball is not overtly threatening. It's the opposite. It's reassuring. Except when Bud Selig is involved, it's reassuring because it's there almost every single day. Sometimes, though, that can give you the false sense of security that Rick alluded to. This is partially on my mind because of the subject matter of this week's episode, and partially on my mind because of the rash words and dark deeds that are being hinted at by various figures in public life. I won't be any more specific than that, but I thought I'd look up a few very particular days, really bad days that didn't seem bad at the time. July 28th, 1914. That day, the Yankees played the White Sox in Chicago at Old Comiskey Park, and they lost 6-2. The Yankees manager was Frank Chance, the peerless leader, the Tinkers to Evers to Chance guy. He was on his way out. He had alienated Yankees ownership the year before by trading the star first baseman Hal Chase. He traded Chase because Chase was disrespectful, and he was throwing games. That
Didn't bother the Yankees ownership at the time because Chase was their gate attraction and they weren't going to win anything anyway, but it bothered Chance. The shortstop that day was Roger Peckinpah. He was only 23 years old, but towards the end of that season, Chance got fed up finally with the Yankees ownership and he resigned, and they decided, for lack of anybody better, they'd make Peck the manager. I always liked the characterization in The Glory of Their Times by third baseman Jimmy Austin, who came up with the Yankees in 1909. Referring to all this nonsense, he said, "God, what a way to run a ball club." So basically, nothing's ever changed for the Yankees, and it was a very typical day in the life of that franchise. It was also, in addition to that, the day that the First World War broke out in Europe. Now let's skip forward a few years. On April 6, 1917, with opening day less than a week away, spring training was winding down. A dispute over Branch Rickey's services, he had been with the St. Louis Browns, and the St. Louis Cardinals, where he was hoping to go, had to be resolved in court. Rickey was allowed to become Cardinals president that night after stipulating he wasn't going to poach certain Browns prospects. Elsewhere, the A's star center fielder Amos Strunk, great name, was sent home by manager Connie Mack from the team's barnstorming stop in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. Mack, sounding very hurt, said, "You can just state that I am through with this player until he explains the cause of his actions towards me. I cannot understand why he acted so indifferently toward me by not speaking to me for the last 10 days. The Giants and Tigers played an exhibition at the Kansas State Agricultural College before a crowd of about 1,500, including many soldiers from Fort Riley. Jim Thorpe played for the Giants that day, and future Hall of Famers Wahoo Sam Crawford and Harry Heilman were in the outfield for the Tigers. Back in New York, the Yankees-Dodgers exhibition at Ebbets Field was rained out. In short, it was a very typical day in baseball for April. It was also the day that Woodrow Wilson asked the Congress to declare war on Germany, and they obliged. Now we're going to move forward even further in time. September 1st, 1939. Both Ben Chapman and Jeff Heath were in the lineup, one in center, one in left for the Indians. Less than 8 years later, they'd both be kind of famous anti-integration guys, anti-Jackie Robinson guys, anti-Larry Doby guys. Heath hit a homer that day. In Brooklyn, Dixie Walker, another anti-Jackie guy, also hit a home run. In the game at Cleveland, Joe DiMaggio tripled off of Bob Feller, and I have nothing bad to say about that. But at Detroit that day, the 3, 4, 5 hitters for the Red Sox were Jimmy Fox. He went 2 for 5 with 2 doubles. Ted Williams, who went 3 for 3 with a double and 2 walks. And shortstop Joe Cronin, he went 0 for 4. And Cronin was another anti-integration guy. On the opposite side of the field, the Tigers were playing third baseman Pinky Higgins, who the Red Sox would later employ as a manager, general manager, and designated asshole. He made it his personal mission to ensure that the Red Sox stayed lily white as long as possible. And they were, in fact, the last team to break their color line. Grudgingly, reluctantly, half-heartedly. And if you want to find a reason for the long-lasting so-called curse of the Bambino that was not broken until 2004, blame pure, self-defeating racism. Blame owner Tom Yawkey, blame player, manager, and general manager Joe Cronin, and blame Mike Pinky Higgins. He hit 2 home runs against the Red Sox that day. In other words, it was a typical day in baseball. Oh, and then in Philadelphia, the Boston Bees or Braves or whatever they were calling themselves back then. It was Bees, actually. They were trying to get away from their own bad reputation. They beat the Phillies. Boston right-hander Bill Posadel threw a complete game shutout. Posadel was known as Sailor Bill because he was a veteran of the U.S. Navy. That trips nicely off the tongue, Sailor Bill Posadel. He'd be back in the service before long. Because, you see, Hitler invaded Poland that day, starting World War II. Now, one more day, you know it's coming. This is not exactly it. December 6, 1941 was an off-season Saturday, so not a ton was going on. But the Yankees and the Athletics made a trade. Right-hander Johnny Babich went from the A's to New York for a veteran minor league third baseman named Buddy Blair. It was an odd deal in that Babich and the Yankees weren't on the best of terms. That season, he had threatened to bust up Joe DiMaggio's record hitting streak by refusing to pitch to him. That didn't happen, but the year before, he had more or less personally stopped the Yankees from winning a 5th straight pennant by going 5-1 with a 2.08 ERA against them. After he shut them out in September, Yankees manager Joe McCarthy was heard to moan, "Babich! Babich! Who the hell is Babich?" I very much doubt he said hell, but you get the idea. Now Babich was his. He knew who Babich was, which sounds odd, but from Carl Mays to Aroldis Chapman, the Yankees have never been particular about who did their work for them if they thought they might be useful. In short, it was just a typical off-season day, and the deal made that team executives could sit back and enjoy Sunday, December 7th, 1941. On all these days, the world was going to hell, and no one had the slightest idea. There's a version of this I like to think about sometimes. It's not baseball, it's Broadway. In late 1938, the playwright Maxwell Anderson and the composer Kurt Weill brought a show called Knickerbocker Holiday to Broadway. It was based on an old story by Washington Irving, the Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle guy. But oddly enough, they had turned it into an anti-fascist musical about Franklin Roosevelt. Anderson, who was kind of a far-left guy, thought Roosevelt was too cozy with the corporate types. Nothing ever changes. And for people on the political extremes, it doesn't matter if it's left or right. The perfect is always the enemy of the good. And Anderson didn't have the slightest idea of what was going on or what was about to befall the planet any more than the ball players and managers and executives that I mentioned on those other days did. Because the real fascists, not FDR, but the real fascists, were about a year away from burying the world in corpses. The only reason that anyone remembers that show is that Walter Huston, great actor, you can see him in a million movies, including The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, which was directed by his son, John Huston. And of course, I should mention his granddaughter is Angelica Huston. He was given a song. It's a little warbly song because he didn't have much of a voice, so they intentionally kept the range of the song limited. It's this wistful little thing called September Song.
2026, Steve, intervening here. I can't give you the song as I had it in the original episode, so I'm just going to read you some lines from it. The song is a standard, and it's been covered so many times that you won't have any trouble finding it. The whole thing is worth listening to in its many versions, but here's an excerpt. When you meet with the young men early in spring, they court you in song and rhyme. They woo you with words and a clover ring, but if you examine the goods they bring, they have little to offer but the songs they sing, and a plentiful waste of time of day. A plentiful waste of time. But it's a long, long while, from May to December, and the days grow short when you reach September. And I have lost one tooth, and I walk a little lame, and I haven't got time for the waiting game. Sometimes there's something in the air. This is a seduction song, really, at least in situ. But when you yank it out of context and you think of the world into which it was born, it sounds like the song of a man who knows that that world is about to come to an end, and he wants to get things squared away while he still has time. A great many people were about to die, so many that no one has ever been able to count them all. 60 million might be right, but we have to give or take a million on that, and that's a painful thing for me to say because every single one of them deserves to be counted on every side as a monument to our own arrogance, anger, stupidity, hatred, and, courage and bravery. And all of that began on an anodyne day, a day when the Yankees were playing the Indians, a day when you're taking in a baseball game or having a catch with your kid or working your job, mowing the lawn, walking the dog, anything, really. Making love to your guy or gal, and you were unaware that someone, somewhere, was courting danger. Those watching with you, the guy in the third row at the ballpark, the woman in the bleachers, the man or woman in your bed, the baby in your crib, the guy watching Joe DiMaggio hit that triple at Cleveland that day, the fellow watching Mike Trout hit one now. Maybe he was part of that 60 million, or maybe he'll be part of the next 60 million, the future 60 million. We have to cherish the time. We have to cherish every moment until then, because the day is coming. The only thing we don't know is when. And that's how September Song functioned on two levels, and still does. And the days trickle down to a precious few, September, November, and these few precious days I'd spend with you. These precious days I'd spend with you.
By Joyce Kilmer, Alan Seeger, Rupert Brooke, and Wilfred Owen, we've made it to the end of another episode. You can follow...
This is the spot where I used to tell you how to find the guests on Twitter, but there is no guest, there is no Twitter. Twitter is now doing things that would have gotten folks thrown in jail in ye olden days, by which I mean last year. How's this new podcast idea? Remember when? The rule of law.
At infiniteinning@gmail.com. We have a sponsor now, but nonetheless, we're still brought to you by a number, and that number is Big 6. I thought our producer had a degree in this stuff, but he told me he's self-taught, learned it all from listening to old Eagles records. Eagles records! Can you imagine? Our theme song, The Infinite Man, which you are listening to now and have been listening to throughout the episode, was co-written by myself and Dr. Rick Mooring. Many years ago, an emotionally disturbed young woman quite literally teed off on him, striking him across the legs with a golf club. He's such a nice guy that...
Would you believe that all these years later, he's still a nice guy? Can't speak for myself, though. I can say that that's all for me for this reissue episode of The Infinite Inning. I'll have a brand new show for you a couple of days after this one goes live. Episode 359, and I look forward to telling you all the stories I have teed up for that show. Hope to see you then. Be safe. I mean, why wouldn't you be? We've got so much to look forward to.